Okay, Year 12. Welcome to the second of this week's videos. This is going to focus on lymphocytes and our specific immune response. We're talking here about white blood cells. So lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell. Okay, and we're talking about B and T lymphocytes. They are the immune response consists of both cell-mediated and humoral immunity, and I'm going to get you to look at the differences between those and compare them as part of the study after this video. Okay, so those are the two things you need to think about: cell-mediated and humoral response. So they consist of, as I said, two types of lymphocytes. Okay, now as we know, all cells begin life as stem cells. Okay, and we're talking about stem cells here in the bone marrow. Okay, but where these cells mature is where they get their name from. Okay, so on the one hand, we have the B lymphocytes. Now these mature in the bone marrow. Okay, they stay in the bone marrow until they are mature. On the other hand, we also have the T lymphocytes, which travel through the blood from the bone marrow to the thymus gland. Okay, and mature in the thymus. So we'll look at both of these two together and in comparison. Okay, let's put that there, try and get this picture into focus. Apologies. There we go, that should be a bit better. Okay, let's focus on the B lymphocytes to start with. Okay, so B lymphocytes are there's three main types, or two main types really, I suppose we can say, and they consist primarily, okay, of plasma cells. Okay, so plasma cells, which are those cells that we've just talked about, okay, which produce antibodies. Okay, so this is part of that immune response. Okay, now as well as that, okay, some of these B lymphocytes will mature into other things, so they don't just become normal plasma cells that produce antibodies. Some of them will also become what we call B effector cells. Okay, now B effector cells are really important. Okay, what they do is they actually produce clones. Now the reason for that is that these plasma cells are brilliant. Okay, they work incredibly hard to produce antibodies to a particular antigen, and then release those antibodies into circulation. But okay, this plasma cell only lives for a few days. It produces about 200 antibodies per second while it's alive, but it only lives for a few days, so it needs replacing. So the B effector cells constantly are forming plasma cell clones of this cell to be able to continuously produce those antibodies into the circulation. Okay, then the final other type of cell that we have is something called a B memory cell. Okay. Now remember, we talked about, I mentioned about antibodies being able to be reproduced at a much quicker the second time around when we meet a disease a second time, and this is where the B memory cells come into action. So they are very long-lived. Okay, whereas these plasma cells last only a few days, these memory cells can last for many years. Okay, and they provide what we call immunological memory. Okay, so they're programmed to remember specific antigens. They enable your body to make a very rapid response when that pathogen is encountered, when that antigen is encountered again. Okay, so these are the B lymphocytes. Now, on the other side, we have here the T lymphocytes. Okay, T lymphocytes are perhaps more aggressive. They are the things that kind of kill the pathogens themselves. We'll look at those in a little bit of detail now. So we have several types. Okay. Now, the one thing that T cells do, okay, is they produce the most important thing. So just give me a second. Yeah. So just drawing a little arrow just to make sure I get this drawn right for you. So we have something called a. This is called a T helper cell. Okay. And this T cell, okay, as the name implies, helps a lot of other processes take place. Okay. Now the first thing it has, okay, is a kind of a receptor on here called Cd4 receptor. Okay. And what that actually does is it binds to the surface antigen on an APC. Okay. Now what you might be asking is an APC, and this you should recall from our little lesson on phagocytosis, is an antigen presenting cell. So this is the cell that is produced at the end of phagocytosis, okay, where the antigen is presented for further processing. Okay, and this is where the T helper cell comes in. Okay, and what that then does, okay, when this actions, is it produces a number of different responses, a number of different interleukins. Okay. Now these are interleukins, are something called, we also know them by the name cytokine. Okay, cytokine response. So the cytokines are what we call cell signalling molecules. Okay. Now hopefully the names of these will start to make some sense as we go through them. Okay, but indication being that cell signalling molecules is obviously something that makes the molecule present itself in various different ways. Okay, and what these cytokines then do is they carry out a number of processes. Okay, and they stimulate all sorts of things that happen. So on the one hand, they stimulate further T cell production, and we'll come into that in a second, because there's lots of different T cells that are produced from this. Okay. They also act to stimulate B cell production. Okay, and this is really important. This is how the two parts of the immune response are activated together. So this process here, remember we've had our process of phagocytosis reacting with the T helper cell, producing the cytokine, which then stimulates these B cells to be produced and the antibodies to be produced. Okay, so they stimulate B cell production, stimulate T cell production, and they also stimulate something called macrophages. And the macrophages are the things that ingest the pathogens. Okay? So, three processes that happen from the cytokines. Now, what then goes on? Let's have a look in a bit more detail at this part here, T cell production. Okay, so we've got a number of different T cells that can now three more types of T cells that can be produced. Okay, now we have something very similar to the cells over here. We have T memory cells. Okay, so T memory cells are also long-lived. Okay, because as the name implies, they need to remember stuff. They're part of this. They also provide this immunological memory. Okay, and what they then do is they rapidly divide to produce T killer cells, which I'll come on to in a second. T killer cells from a second infection. Okay, so when they meet an antigen for a second time, they produce T killer cells rapidly. Okay, so what are T killer cells? They're the kind of ones we want to really understand. Okay, let's put these over here. Okay, so our T killer cells. Lots and lots of okay, so T killer cells are the things that destroy the pathogen. So the way they do that is by use of a particular chemical. So they produce a chemical called Perforin. Okay, so Perforin. Now, name kind of implies it's something to do with perspiration, and what it does is it makes holes in the cell membrane of the pathogen. Okay, and that enables obviously other things to get in across the membrane and for it to basically be destroyed. Okay. Okay, the last thing, okay, as part of this process, are perhaps the most important part in a way, okay, and that is the T regulator cells. The T regulator cells are incredibly important, okay, because T regulator cells are what actually suppress and control the immune system. Okay, without T regulator cells, the immune response, the immune system can go out of control. It can start destroying self antigens. It can cause harm to the body, and it prevents, therefore, an autoimmune response. Okay. So this happened as press control and so on. So once they basically, it stops the immune response once that whole pathogen has been destroyed. So if you imagine if you've recovered from the common cold, okay, and one of the ways that your body responds to that infection of the common cold is to present things like fever. Okay, you might have the chills, or the sweats, whatever, those kind of things. That is to get rid of the virus. Now, if your T regulator cells didn't work, didn't recognise when that pathogen had gone, that fever would continue. That response would stay there, and you would not recover back to feeling well again. You would constantly, even though the pathogen had been destroyed, you would continue to feel ill. Okay. Because remember, it's not the pathogen that's making you feel ill as such, it is the response to the pathogen. Okay? And this is really important because one of the things you're going to come on to, as well as looking at, as I mentioned to you, the differences between what we call cell-mediated and humoral immunity. Okay? I'm also going to get you to look at what happens when this process goes wrong, and in looking at some autoimmune diseases and how they occur, where they affect the body, and the sorts of treatments that are used in order to prevent them or to treat them. Okay, so that is an overview, as I say, of the immune response, B and T lymphocytes. Hopefully that's nice and clear for you. Just make sure that you can see all of that. If you've got any questions about that video or about the previous video, please just let me know via the Teams or via email, and I will I'll be setting you some other work and speak to you again soon. Okay, bye for now.